This is Lawgical, the UAE's first and still the only regular legal podcast. Welcome, my name's Tim Elliott. Lawgical comes to you from the Dubai-based legal firm HPL Yamalova and Plethka. And as ever, here is the managing partner, Ludmila Yamalova. It's nice to see you.
Great to be here with you, Tim, as always.
Now today, Ludmila, this is the first of 4 podcasts looking at the cost of renting property here in Dubai. A little bit about the market, but more specifically, it's about the rent evaluation certificate here in Dubai, and we'll come to that in a moment. But I wanted to start with, I guess to say that property is a hot topic is kind of understatement of the millennium, really, isn't it? Let's face it. And for the last couple of years, we've seen rocketing property prices once again. It's really... I think it's time to reiterate what a landlord can and what a landlord can't do.
Yes, so you're absolutely right. And as we're recording this podcast, it is May 2023. And as you said, in the last year in particular, there has been a tremendous increase in property prices in the UAE in general and certainly in Dubai. And this applies to sale of properties or sale prices as well as rental properties. And because the market is so hot, and we can speculate the reasons for why it's so hot, but this is perhaps beyond the subject of today's podcast. But the reality is that certainly in many parts of Dubai, by some accounts, properties have gone up at least double, if not triple. And because of that, a lot of owners who have purchased perhaps at more, perhaps less lucrative times for the sellers at the time are now seeing this as an opportunity to sell their properties and obtain that double or triple of the purchase price, which is happening all across. So that's on one hand. So owners want to sell the properties because they think that they can obtain much better prices, and they are thinking that the time is now, or kind of throughout this year, 2023. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, there are a lot of owners who want to increase rent, or at least obtain much higher rent. So in other words, they don't necessarily want to sell the properties, but they certainly are very eager to increase the rent and milk more from their properties. And as I've said, we've seen a lot of accounts of property prices for rental contracts increasing over the last year, if double and even triple. So as is expected, there's quite a bit of turbulence that is happening in the market now in terms of owners wanting to evict tenants, either to sell property or to evict, in most cases, to increase rent. And in many cases, they are giving eviction notices on representations that they want to sell the property, but where in fact what they really want to do is just simply increase rent. And that's as far as the UAE is concerned. And obviously, Dubai in particular, historically has been one emirate that has had the largest number of expats, and therefore a lot more properties that are being bought, rented, and flipped in different ways. And so as we've talked about it before in our previous podcasts, as far as rental laws are concerned, every emirate has its own rental laws. So when we're talking about the Dubai rental market, we're talking about the Dubai rental law. So in Dubai, there is a specific law that relates to rentals and tenant and landlord relationship in general, as well as a specific authority that is entitled or is authorized to regulate the market and ultimately adjudicate the market. So in Dubai, the authorities that are involved, there's one authority called the Dubai Land Department, or DLD, and under it there is an authority that's sort of part of DLD, and that's Rera, or the Real Estate Regulatory Agency, that sort of regulates the market. And then under it is also the RDC, and the RDC, the Real Estate Dispute Center. And so these, in terms of authorities, these are the authorities that look after and regulate and enforce the rental issues in the UAE. And with regards to laws, there is a Dubai rental laws, and there is the law from 2008, and that was later amended or in 2007, and it was later amended in 2008, and then amended in 2013. So different amendments to that rental law. But ultimately, there is a rental law, Dubai rental law, and these different authorities, in particular RDC and the Rent Dispute Center, are authorized to apply and enforce this law in the UAE.
Okay, so we've got the Dubai Land Department, which is like the head agency. Then we've got Rera, the real estate regulatory agency. And what we then have, and I want to get into people who are renting, because these 4 podcasts are really about rent valuation certificates. We have what's known as the rent calculator, and Rera head the rent calculator, don't they? They regulate the rental landscape, if you like, in Dubai.
Yes, so the Dubai rental law, in relevant terms, sets specific guidelines and regulations as to when landlords can increase rent, can evict tenants, and under what conditions. So with regards to rent increase in particular, so we'll limit this to this specific part of tenancy, landlord-tenancy relationship, and that is if the landlord wants to increase rent. So there, as you rightfully said, as per this law, there's a base and there's a framework within which landlords can increase rent. One is that they need to give proper notice. First of all, they can only increase rent once the lease agreement, the term of the lease agreement, is coming to an end. So they cannot increase rent during the lease term.
Yes,
that's one. Two, if they are going to increase rent, they at the end of or for the next rental term, they need to give tenants proper notice. 3, the tenant obviously has to agree to it because it's a contract and no party can unilaterally change the contract. So for a contract to be amended properly, both parties, the landlord can try to increase rent, but in order for that rent increase to take effect, the tenant ultimately has to agree. Mm-hmm. 4, as per the Dubai rental laws, the rent increase can only be on very specific conditions, and that is if it is in line with the Rera calculator. Now, Rera, as we've said earlier, is the real estate regulatory agency, has on its website a calculator that guides or sets the parameters within which rent can be increased, if at all. So for anybody who wants to know whether their property will be subject to this rent increase, they have to go to the Rera calculator. They input the area where they live, and then also the specifications of their specific property. So, for example, the 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, an apartment or a villa, and then on the basis of that calculator, and then also they need to enter what the current rental price they are paying, and on the basis of these factors that they input into the calculator, the Rera calculator will show whether there is a rent increase allowed to begin with, and if so, to what percentage. Yeah. So that's basically how the Rera calculator works, and it's a very effective tool for both parties, because by now most landlords and most tenants know about the Rera calculator. So whenever there is a discussion between the tenant and landlord about potential increase in rent, all the parties, well, not so much perhaps landlords, but certainly the tenants, run to the Rera calculator, and it's all electronically accessible. And that will do a print screen and send it to the landlord. Hey, by the way, because remember, this calculator shows, because once you've input the specifications for your property and also the current rental price that you pay, it will tell you whether the rent increase is allowed at all. And in most cases, it says no rent increase allowed. So tenants just do a print screen of that screen and send it to the landlord and say, well, apologies, but you are not entitled to any rent increase.
There are variables here, but that's the kind of, I guess that's like a helicopter view, isn't it? I mean, historically, the rent calculator is updated annually. As far as I'm aware, since COVID, it doesn't seem to have happened, and there have been a few, I guess, changes. Since rents have increased dramatically since that time, and it really is the last couple of years, kind of towards the center of the pandemic, I suppose, rents started to really creep up, and then they seem to still be going up. Who knows? Where are we now in terms of the rent calculator?
So you're right. The authorities have stated on over the last year in particular, maybe even 2 years, on different occasions, that they are constantly reassessing the Rera calculator and adjusting it, updating it to make sure that sort of it's in line with the trends, the current market trends. There isn't really a visibility to us, the public, in terms of what factors go into that revision or review of the Rera calculator from the standpoint of the authorities, and when and how they adjust. But the presumption is that if you were to go on the Rera calculator today, more or less the prices are reflective of the adjusted factors and numbers. So we're not quite sure whether what the margin is, by how much the authorities actually increasing prices, if at all. But perhaps from what we know, they are adding more nuances to the calculator. So, for example, in the past, you couldn't, there's, in terms of the areas that you select, there would be one general area, the marina, for example, or the palm. So as time goes on, some of these geographic areas have become a little more nuanced, a little narrower, a little more refined. And then the adjustment is happening perhaps less about in terms of the increasing the market price, but more allowing users to input more factors that would take into account the specific property specifications or parameters that are more reflective of the actual value of the property. In other words, we have to take it at face value that the calculator is being updated. If you talk to the landlords, maybe they will disagree because they will think it's not being updated quickly enough or sufficiently enough. But we know that constant efforts are taking place behind this. So this is seen, and certain elements and certain adjustments are being made. It's just perhaps they're not as visible to us because it kind of happens on the back end.
I mean, the thing is, Dubai moves quickly, doesn't it? It always seems to me you go away for a couple of months, maybe for a summer holiday, and you come back and drive down the road, and there's a building there that wasn't there 2 months ago. And I'm kind of not exaggerating that. It does move really fast, and the prices have increased exponentially in the last couple of years. So you can understand why landlords have something to say. Let's take the position of the landlord. If you feel like your property value's increased, use that word again, exponentially, and that means that you should be charging a higher rent to reflect that. What you need to do is prove that, don't you? So you need to then go to the land department and you have to get a rent valuation certificate. Is that the procedure?
Yes, so the same Dubai rental law that we discussed also has a provision that allows for landlords to request the authorities to provide a valuation certificate for that specific property. It's in the event that the owner of the property or the landlord believe that that specific property is not adequately represented by the Rera calculator, right? And so in those kinds of cases, the law provides an option for the owners of the properties to approach the authorities and request for the authorities to re-examine or examine their specific property that will be perhaps treated somewhat differently from the average value of the properties in that specific area. So the law provides for it. And now, in light of the recent trends and the recent increase in property values, there's a lot more interest in actually exercising this right under the law, and we're seeing a lot more cases. And so the process is for landlords to do that is, as you said, through the Dubai Land Department. They have a specific and official app, which is called the Dubai Rest app. And so for the landlords, they need to download this app, or it can be also accessed through the website. And then there is a services menu in the app on the website, and there's a specific request to request valuation of property lease. And so you file this request. As part of the request, there's certain documents that need to be submitted, such as the details and the photos of the property in particular, and then a payment of the reevaluation payment or request for a reevaluation fee, which is 2,000 dirhams. And the idea here is that, let's say I'm an owner of a property that I've owned for the last 10 years, and let's say in the last 2 years the property I had I had a tenant for the last X number of years, and the tenant moved out last year. So now I've owned the property for so long, it's always been tenanted now. I know that the market is heating up. In any event, the property is a little bit dated, so I'm going to update it. So and now is an opportune time, let's say last year or maybe this year, it's an opportune time to update it. And now I repaint it, I change all the appliances, I change tiles, and some owners. And by the way, there's an increase in this trend now, because by now the real estate market in Dubai is at least about 15 years old, and so a lot of properties are now getting to that stage where they need a little bit of an update. And owners are increasingly making these initiatives and taking these efforts in renovating their places. And in some cases, the renovations are pretty significant, where they are removing walls, changing walls, and expanding certain rooms, extending other areas, opening up windows, and so on and so forth. So as a result, you can see that certain properties, but not all properties, are being updated. So in the same building, you could have 100 units, and out of these 100 units, 10 have been updated. Well, first of all, when you look at these 10 updated or upgraded units and compare them to the remaining 100 units or 90 units, you can see that there's got to be a fairly significant difference in the value proposition in terms of the tenant's enjoyment of the property. So it's often in cases like this that landlords want to believe that reevaluation certificate or valuation certificate is relevant, because their property stands out from the average properties in that same neighborhood. So that's one reason, for example, a factor for evaluation or reevaluation of property value. The other one is the specific parameters of that specific property. So, for example, the view. Let's say if you are in JBR, I mean, you could have properties that are even facing the sea, and it's got a beautiful view of the sea, or the JBR Walk, or the marina, and then the other unit that may even be bigger on the same floor, maybe the same, more or less the same 2 or 3 bedrooms, whatever it may be, but that one looks into the building next door. So right away, there's a significant value, or disparity in value between the two units that in terms of all other factors, seem to be equal, except this one view. I mean, that's just one example, right? So for landlords who find themselves in those situations, either because they've upgraded the unit or because they think their particular property should not be bunched up or combined with all the other sort of average, as an average of other properties in the area, because, let's say, it was a unique view or some other value proposition, believe that that's not fair for them to be bunched into the same sort of factors that go into the Rera calculator. So on the basis of that, that's what, and there are yet obviously others who believe that in general their property should just be valued differently because they just bought it, right? That's another reason, because they just bought it. They think, hey, hang on a second, I just bought this for X number of million of dirhams, and the tenants are paying me the same as somebody else who owns this property that they bought 10 years ago for half the price. So there's a lot of owners like that too. So as part of the service, they can submit the documents to Rera or the land department for them to assess as to what the current value of the property, that specific property, will be. So it's all done completely online. You submit through this Dubai Rest app or Dubai Rest website, submit the documents of your property, you pay the fee, and then based on the information that you send, and in most cases, by the way, it's not that the authorities or representatives of the land department go and actually inspect your unit. That also is an option, but so far we haven't really seen much of that. So it's purely based on the documents that owners submit to DLD as part of this request for evaluation of their property. In some cases, at least in the past specifically, there were some representatives actually that would go and inspect the property physically. It's a little less common now because I think authorities have enough factors to rely on in their database. Because what they also look at is for example, at the various properties that have been sold in that neighborhood, or what other newer rentals are going for. So based on that information that you input as a tenant, the DLD will may or may not issue a new valuation certificate. So that's sort of how the process works.
Okay, so assuming you're a landlord and you prove the value of your property, The rent evaluation certificate is an official reference document, isn't it? So that's recognized. And what that means then, in theory, at the next kind of appropriate opportunity, a landlord can raise the rent on a property.
That's the idea. So, and this is exactly why landlords make this effort and do this, so follow this process, is to ultimately get something official that is an alternative to the Rera calculator. Because right now, the way the law allows for landlords to request the increase in the for the property is on the basis of the Rera calculator. So that's your really only point of reference. Yeah. So now the evaluation certificate gives you an alternative point of reference to rely on as part of your request for rent increase. So in other words, Rera calculator in this particular case is not the superseding authority or reference. So the the evaluation certificate ultimately kind of takes precedence over the Rera calculator in these kinds of cases. And this, by the way, is based on the Dubai Law number 33 of 2008, and in particular Article 9.2. That specifically sets out criteria for landlords and for the authorities to potentially reassess the value of the property depending on kind of the economic situation of the emirate, and that's the quote from the law itself, and the average rent of similar property in determining the current market value of the property.
Okay, so the principle of property reevaluation is regulated and approved under a Dubai law. Last question for you, Ludmila. What does it cost? There is a cost to getting the certificate. And if you own multiple properties, I guess you have to get one for each one, clearly.
Correct. So this certificate is not for the owner, but it's for the property. So for each property. So if you own 10 properties, even if they're on the same floor, you would have to apply for same floor, let's say, and same specifications. You would actually have to apply for a certificate for each one of these properties if you want to use this certificate in particular with the authorities. Now, if you just want to, for example, let's say you have 10 units on the same floor, and you've obtained this evaluation certificate for one property, and you want to use it for the other properties because they're all located on the same floor, you can certainly present it to your tenant and say, listen, this is my property has recently been reassessed. Here's a certificate. Will you please pay a higher rent on the basis of this evaluation certificate? They may not agree. If they agree, that's all you need. So you don't need to obtain a specific certificate for that specific property if your tenant agrees. So that's in the event that the tenant does not agree and you end up going to RDC or the rental court, then that certainly is an argument. If you don't present a certificate for that specific property, that's, you can see an argument from the tenant that would challenge a certificate on the basis that does not apply to their specific unit.
Later in this series, we'll break down by how much and the precise stipulations that apply if you do, as a landlord, have one of these certificates. For now, that's the first of 4 podcasts looking at the rent valuation certificate here in Dubai. Next time, increasing rents on the basis of that certificate. That'll be part 2. As ever, thanks for watching, listening, or both, and thanks to our legal expert, managing partner here at Yamalova and Plethka. That's Ludmila Yamalova. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Tim. Thanks for being here.
You can find us at LYLAW on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube. You can find all our podcasts at lylawyers.com. If you'd like a legal question answered in an episode of Lawgical, or if you'd like to talk to a qualified UAE experienced legal professional, click contact. Once again, it's lylawyers.com.